Imagine holding hands with strangers, everybody's eyes are closed, and the people on either side of you are breathing really intently. This is one of my coven swords. We actually have two.
In my mind, there's a wheel to mastery.
But to me, it's about relationships with other worlds. I'm thinking about how people come to believe things.
Is witchcraft a religion? Because in the very beginning of the book, you start by saying, yes, except for when it is definitely not. So hello, everyone. Thorn Mooney is joining me today. I cannot believe this moment has come because I've idolized Thorn for so long. If you don't know who Thorn is, well, I'll let Thorn introduce herself in a moment, but I actually have two of her books here. So I have The Witch's Path, Advancing Your Craft at Every Level. I read this a while. When did you publish this book?
2021, I
Okay.
think.
I think I
Yeah.
read it the same year. It has like candle wax all over it, but we'll pretend that's not the case. And then I just recently finished Witches Among Us, which is the book that you just published, which I'm so stoked for. So we're going to be talking about this book. We're also going to talk about what it means to be a witch. I really wanted this to be a casual, chatty conversation rather than like a scripted, okay, here we go from the next to the next. So this is just going to be a conversation amongst witches. We're going to be talking about what it means to us personally to practice witchcraft and to call ourselves witches, because obviously those definitions can vary from practitioner to practitioner. So Thorn is not only an author, she also has a YouTube presence and she does a million different things. So Thorn, do you want to introduce yourself to the myriad of things that you do?
Sure. Hello. My name is Thorn, and I am a Gardnerian witch and a priestess and a coven leader. I've been doing that for more than a decade at this point, running a group. And before that, I've been a self-taught solitary. I've been an intrepid university student with my copies of Ronald Hutton, right? I have explored a number of different magical traditions over the years, but I've settled pretty firmly within Gardnerian witchcraft. I'm also a graduate student. I'm working on a PhD in religion and culture, where I spend a lot of time thinking about kind of the messy spaces around secularism and spirituality and religion and all of the ways that those things impact surprising things in our life. And I run my mouth on the internet about witchcraft and magic and religion and all of it.
As do I. I have definitely run my mouth a little bit too much sometimes, and then I got to reel it back in a little bit. So I feel you there for sure. So before we get into what it means to be a witch and all of that stuff, I wanted to make you feel really awkward by reading my Goodreads review of this book because I just finished it. I really, really loved it. So I'm going to read it for everybody out there that's maybe curious about getting this book. So this book, to me, is a very scholarly look at contemporary witchcraft and Wicca. It showcases what these practices actually look like, and it offers insight into what it means to be a witch. This book is not just for witches, it's about witches. This book should be given to any beginner witch or any non-witch that seeks to understand our world. It talks about the history of spiritual movements such as Theosophy, New Thought, paganism, witchcraft, Wicca, and even some of the New Age community. The book also discusses various different types of witchcraft, such as Wicca, eclecticism, traditional witchcraft, folk witchcraft, and so on. And Thorn has done a great job representing our world. So I really, really hope that any beginner witch watching this picks up this book. I think it's a lovely introduction into our community. And for anybody, I mean, I think Thorn, you said this on an interview. I can't remember where you said this, but I caught a brief clip of you saying something like, this book is for your mom. Like this book is literally meant for the people who don't understand witchcraft at all. So do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I wrote this book to fill what I perceived as a significant gap in the literature. As you well know, there are a bajillion books about witches and witchcraft, and more coming out every year. But there really wasn't one that I wanted to give to my therapist,
Mm.
right? Or to give to a work colleague or a parent, a new partner. There hasn't been up to this point a solid, kind of neutral, smart book that isn't designed to teach the reader how to do witchcraft. If you think about it, I mean, whether or not you think of witchcraft as a religion, if you think about like going into a Barnes and Noble or something, if you were curious about Catholicism or Buddhism, you could go and you could read a book about those traditions that wasn't full of prayers and telling you how to become members of that tradition. But you really can't do that with witchcraft. If you go to a bookstore, you're cruising the internet, or you go to a con or something, the books that are on the market are overwhelmingly by practitioners for practitioners, which is great. But I needed something to give to, you know, somebody's mom. Maybe not my mom, your mom.
Sure. It's so true because I hear from
Mhm.
people all the time, oh my gosh, I'm practicing in secret because of my parents or my partner or whomever. And just as a side note, I hear the dating scene is so hard as a witch. I wouldn't know because I married a weirdo just like myself. I got really lucky with that. But if somebody were practicing and they really wanted just a how to, or not necessarily a how to, but a book about witches and about the witchcraft community, you could simply give this to your partner and say, okay, this explains everything. So I think you did a really great job with that. It really gives us a voice rather than us having to retell the same story over and over to literally everyone in our lives. There's just a book about it now, and we can just be like, hey, this is what the community is like if you're curious. And that way they can have their fears dissuaded. They can, write off any fantasy notions that they may have with the term witch, all of those things. So I appreciate you for writing that. Yeah. I wanted to dive deeper into the topic of is witchcraft a religion? Because in the very beginning in the book, you start by saying, yes, except for when it is definitely not. So, can you elaborate on that? Let's talk about religion and witchcraft and whether they're synonymous.
Sure. So the thing that I think gets lost in the conversations about whether or not witchcraft is a religion, and I feel like when you're cruising around on the internet, pretty much anywhere today, overwhelmingly, the opinion is it's a practice, not a religion. And usually this will be stated with some vehemence, right? Like, of course, you dummy, it's a practice, not a religion, right? And we're all supposed to just like nod along and go, yeah, well, obviously. But the thing that's never on the table is what we actually think a religion is.
Mm,
Um, and that to me is fundamental to answering that question because when you sit down with a bunch of people, you realize really quickly that we're all actually operating with sometimes very different definitions of what that means. And that's the question that I think needs to come first if we are desiring to have conversations with people outside of our communities. Whether
sure.
or not witchcraft is a religion, I don't know, matters so much in a room full of witches. But if we're trying to have conversations with others, those are boundaries that are useful, just so that we can have some shared language. And one of the things that you figure out really quickly when you study religion formally, so that's my background, I'm a religious studies scholar. One of the things you figure out really quickly is that popular definitions of religion that circulate, especially in the United States, really in the English speaking world, but especially the United States, is that definition, the one that includes all of those things that your viewers are probably thinking right now, right? Dogma, rules, hierarchies, sacred books. That's a very imperialist, right? Like colonial definition that's rooted in a very specific paradigm, particularly in a kind of Protestant Christianity.
Mm,
And that is a box that then gets superimposed on all of these other traditions as a way of deciding who gets to be protected by the state and who really counts as being the best sort of human,
mm,
right?
mhm.
So that definition is a weapon. And it's not the only definition floating around. You'll notice a lot of those popular definitions of religion exclude a lot of traditions that we maybe would think of as religion, right? Like Buddhism, for example,
Sure.
some kinds of Hinduism, Taoism, right? Like some of these other traditions, especially Asian traditions, that get left out because we're so trapped in this very kind of Western, white, Christocentric mindset. And that's not how I want to approach my witchcraft. So, whether or not witchcraft is a religion, I think depends on where you're standing. And that's why I say, well, it is, except for when it's definitely not, because I want to respect those boundaries of practitioners who are very firmly in that camp of no, it's not a religion. Absolutely, sure. But it's an act of violence to then turn around and look at other groups and go, and it's not for you either, right? And
Sure.
that's what I want to avoid.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I think it's interesting that you brought up Buddhism. I do have a background with Zen Buddhism. I was a Zen Buddhist for, 5, 6 years and I had a mentor and all of that. And it was something that was deeply impactful for me. But it's so funny whenever I go online, you like fill out an intake form, right? And sometimes, there may be a spot for religion and you have all these different religions and Buddhism and Wicca's on there or whatever. And Buddhism for me, I feel like it's very similar in this conversation because I don't consider it a religion at all. I consider it a form of spirituality. It doesn't have that religious doctrine, I guess. There are certain paths of Buddhism that maybe we could classify as more religious than Zen Buddhism. Zen Buddhism has its own, I guess, independence and a little bit of a eclecticism versus like other routes of Buddhism. But I feel like that's very similar to the witchcraft scene where we're trying to decide whether it is or is not a religion. And for some people, it's just spirituality. And those terms evolve over time and it's really complex. But it would be nice if witchcraft were listed on the intake form. Let me just say that because then I don't know. I feel like it would just be so nice if that were the case.
Sure. Well, I think, in connection to that, the reason that the intake form is asking you at all is so that the state knows how to kind of regulate you in a particular way, right?
Mhm.
Whether that means they're taking some kind of demographic information because they think that reveals something about you as a client. If we're talking about matters of taxation, right? If we're talking
Mm,
about taxation, right, the definition of religion suddenly matters very much. If we're talking about legal protection, and here I'm thinking about the Satanic Panic, right? I went to high school. The Columbine High School shooting happened when I was a freshman, and I remember very distinctly all of the rules that were suddenly in place about not being allowed to wear occult jewelry in school, right? And students who were known to be somehow involved in the occult, which included Wicca was very popular at that time, right? So the Wiccan students, the neo-pagan students, etc. A lot of those kids were suddenly like called out onto the carpet, right? And we saw kids being suspended, right, sent home, etc. Um, Imagine if that state regulatory box defining religion had been applied there in a way that it might be applied today, right? And I'm not saying that that's like the answer. Okay, I regulating children at all just like, makes me queasy. But a lot of these fears and a lot of these impulses are really closely connected to what's going on in the political climate. And whether or not you call something a religion has real impact on people, whether you're talking about yourself and your own traditions or the Buddhist family down the street.
sure.
And that's the thing that I wish we would be a little bit less flippant about when we're talking to other witches as though they're stupid, right? For
Right.
identifying as either secular or spiritual or religious.
Right. Yeah. It's really frustrating when our spirituality, if we're going to use that term, is seen
Sure.
as silly or grandiose or fantasy or what have you. So, this kind of brings me to wanting to ask you about the term witch in general, because obviously the term witch carries its own connotation. And I wanted to ask you personally, the term witch, as you embody it, what does that mean to you? Like when you call yourself a witch, what do you mean by that?
Um, to me personally, right, to me personally, the hinge, right, of witchcraft is a type of relationship with spirit worlds.
Hmm.
Um, Now, the boundaries of those things might shift. So for me, very specifically, it's about that. It's also about connections with particular deities, right? Like I exist in a Gardnerian framework where a particularly religious strain of witchcraft. We worship gods. Our commitment to those gods are what make us members of that tradition. But we're traversing in spirit realms to build relationships with them. We have relationships with the dead, right? We have relationships with land spirits, etc. To me, that is at the crux of my own craft. And that's what I mean when I say that I practice witchcraft. Now, part of that is also practical magic, but there's gobs and gobs of magical systems out there that aren't witchcraft, right? Which is why to me it's not enough to just say that, oh, if you practice magic, you're a witch. Well, maybe if you practice magic, you're actually a Southern Baptist, because Southern Baptists practice magic, right? Maybe you're Catholic, right? Like maybe you're a Buddhist, maybe you have a Chinese folk practice, maybe you like there's an infinite number of magical systems out there that aren't witchcraft. That said, um, the word witch encompasses a lot of other things, right? For some people, it's a kind of essence tied to particular identities. For some people, it's about a particular relationship with the patriarchy, right? This idea that like there's a little witch in every woman. Like these are very different definitions of witchcraft to me. And I'll put them under the umbrella. The reality is that when I meet somebody who says that they're a witch, I actually don't know anything about them, except maybe that they see themselves as an outsider. That's probably the best bet that I have. But to me, it's about relationships with other worlds.
Oh no, that's so true. I love the last bit that you said about the term witch, feeling other, feeling maybe just a little bit alternative, I guess, if I could use that word. I agree with you. I do, because I adopt a lot of labels. I'm a chaos magician, obviously, and
Mhm.
I also call myself a witch, and then I call myself a psychic, and then I dabble over here in ceremonial magic, and then and so what you were saying about all these different practices, magic is not synonymous with witchcraft. Like, of course, witchcraft can be just practical magic, but there's so many other traditions that also practice magic. So I think that you are on par with that. But really, when it comes to the practicality of witchcraft, like for me to call myself a witch, the way that I see it is if I have to break it down to what I'm doing on a day to day, it's working with spirits, like you said, working with the other world, traveling in the astral realm, etc. Very much about practical magic, doing a little something, something here and there to maybe influence something, bring something I desire, etc. But it's also this connection to the land. It's really earthy. It's really grounded in the physical day-to-day mundane stuff. And I really love that. And I really appreciate your approach specifically with your content too, not to totally deviate from the current book that you wrote, but the past book, The Witch's Path, I loved this one too because it was so grounded and rooted in clean your room, like
No,
reconnect reconnect to the basics, okay? So, yeah, I just really appreciated that.
I try not to make a habit of reading reviews, but I did stumble into a review for The Witch's Path several years ago when it came
Yeah.
out that was something to the effect of like, you know, 5 stars. I hate that Thorn Mooney. I really just wanted to learn witchcraft, but she's making me clean my room. 5 stars. Just like, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it because like with The Witch's Path, like I said, I try to write to fill in gaps. I don't
Yes.
necessarily think that anybody needs my hot takes on witchcraft as opposed to the hundred of other people offering hot takes on witchcraft.
Hmm.
But I try to write things that I think haven't been said when that's possible. And what I hadn't seen was we have this idea of advanced witchcraft being about like whether or not you learn Latin or something, right? Advanced witchcraft is about like, how many pages you can get into the Azoisha before you flush it down a toilet or something, right? Like,
Sure. Sure.
right, like if it's hard to get and hard to understand, it must be advanced. And that to me is a very like to me that's like misguided and limited. Like even from an
Sure.
educator's perspective, the idea that something's hard makes it better. Like that's a problem. There wasn't a lot of material out there that was like, no, actually, we need to think about some of the practical things going on around you. And like maybe what you need isn't another spell on the thing, you know.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how to maybe get a good therapist. Right.
Yeah.
That felt more important.
Sure.
So that will help and you will take steps forward, therefore
Yeah.
you are advancing.
Yes. I feel like there is this, I don't know how I'm going to explain this. I'm probably not going to explain this properly, but in my mind, there's a wheel to mastery. So you start at this beginning point of learning all the basics, etc. Then you go, okay, like you were saying, in order to advance in my craft, I need to do this really hard thing, this ridiculous ritual. I need to read all these books and I need to dive into subjects that seem so obscure and are just so ambiguous. And then you hit the other side of mastery and you go, oh, actually, no, going back to the basics and coming at it from a different point of view with a lot of wisdom that you have acquired, that's mastery. Doing the basics from a more advanced perspective. And then you go back into, oh, I don't know shit. I don't know anything at all. And then you try to unlearn everything that you ever did and really truly start at the basics. So I feel like it's like this whole wheel to mastering something. And the advanced part isn't just at that point of the wheel where you're reading the complex ritual and trying to do it, you know?
Totally. Well, and I think some of it too was also just being around in our community. And I love us. I'm not trying to talk shit about us, right? But like we've all met those people who, yeah, they've got all of the fancy books. They've done the advanced shit.
Mhm.
They go to all the festivals or they do all the things. They have all the tools. But you still look at them and you go, man, I don't envy you at all. Right? Right? Like I don't want to be you.
Yeah,
And I feel like whatever sort of magic you're practicing, at some point, it really just needs to make some improvement on your life or you or something. And you get to be the judge of that. You get to decide, what's worth it and where those boundaries are. I'm not here to tell you, but like, it doesn't matter how advanced your practice is or how like ooky you look on TikTok or whatever, if like you're barely keeping your life together in other respects. So that to me is a thing that needs to be addressed, which is not to say that like if bad things happen to you, your witchcraft isn't working. That's not what I'm saying. But
sure.
I feel like there's this knee jerk to oh, I better do a cord cutting spell instead of like maybe just journal my feelings and call a friend and
Yeah,
vent,
yeah,
and which of
definitely.
those is actually the more mature decision.
Mm. So true. I appreciate Baneful Magic books when they spend like a good first two chapters just talking about when it's even appropriate to do
Yeah.
those kinds of workings, because just because somebody pissed you off at work doesn't mean you need to be throwing a working towards them, and that probably isn't the most effective way to go about it.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you're in those kinds of situations over and over again, like if again, you hang out on social media, the people who are talking about baneful magic all the time and hexing people all the time, if you have to hex people all the time, like what is happening?
I'm just
You
saying
know,
you might be the problem at that point.
it
You
might be the
might
problem at
be
that
the
point.
problem.
Right.
It's like
Like,
we've probably all been there. We've probably all been there. We need to look within. But
well, and just a little bit of perspective also makes a lot of those sorts of problems seem like they're actually not that important.
if you're open to it, I want to talk about your personal practice and kind of like a
Sure.
peek behind the curtain, I guess, whatever you're willing to share. What does your practice look like nowadays? Because I'm sure it's evolved over the years. And I know that Wicca has really been a strong thing for you over many years. So I'd love for you to talk about your relationship with that, what you're currently doing.
Yeah. Well, I imagine like a lot of witches, it's a hodgepodge. I think there's definitely this stereotype that Wiccans and especially like traditional Wiccans, like we just have a formula and we have to stick to that formula. And if we deviate from it, then like we turn into pillars of salt or something. I don't know. But all witchcraft to me, at least all the witchcraft I've ever encountered, has been at its very nature eclectic and exploratory and personalized. And all of that applies to me too. So, like, I'm operating, especially in my coven, I'm operating within a Gardnerian framework. So, like, we have particular liturgies and ritual forms. And those things are consistent to a point, right? But there's a lot of flexibility built in.
Mm.
And then on top of that, everybody in the group has a personal practice.
Yeah.
And that personal practice is always eclectic at its core. So, like, I'm involved with the OTO. I practice ceremonial magic as well. I'm a religious studies scholar, so like professionally, I spend an awful lot of time looking at other traditions, not so that I can abscond with them, but because it places what I'm doing within a wider context. So, for example, you don't have to know very much about witchcraft at all before you start seeing very, very clear connections to things like New Thought or
Mm.
spiritualism or theosophy, right? Which you brought up. That's a chapter in my book. Once you see those connections, you can make a few choices. If you don't like the origins of something, you can adapt it. You can throw it out of your practice, right? You can make choices. You can also go back and look at the historical context and see where something actually comes from, right? Why do we think that there's a veil between the world that thins around the, like, why do we think? Because it's very easy to go, oh, it's because of these ancient traditions. A lot of the time it's whether or not that was true originally, a lot of the time it's because our traditions were actually disseminated
Mm.
in probably the 19th and early 20th century by some of these other movements.
Right.
Um, so I'm doing a lot of research right now in spiritualism and with like paranormal investigator communities and thinking about how I'm thinking about how people come to believe things.
Oh,
And
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, and how is it, not just them, obviously, but like my beliefs, like how did I come to these and how, and you figure out pretty quickly that belief is actually quite a lot of work,
It
right?
is.
Like one of the reasons why I think witches are so like insecure on the internet all the time is because we have to work so hard to have the experiences that we do and then interpret those experiences. And I don't find that disheartening at all. I actually think that that's really cool because if I can learn more about how beliefs are actually established and how we come to have the experiences that we have, it means I can replicate them,
Hmm.
you know? So all that to say, my practice includes my scholarly pursuits. It includes the rights of my formalized tradition. It includes my own perspectives and experimentation, my readings in wider kind of Western esoteric systems. Um, and anyway, it's exciting and it's versatile. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
You kind of brought up, first of all, I love your eclectic expertise in so many different things, but you also brought up witching and online spaces and then also belief. And from my paradigm as a chaot, obviously, I use belief as a tool to manifest the
Yeah.
things I desire. That's pretty integral to a chaos magic practice. But witching in an online space is really interesting from a creator perspective and then also from a consumer perspective. Because if you are a creator, and you're posting something online about your experience. I posted a video where I was working with Thoth. I still work with him. I'm very much
Yeah.
dedicated to Thoth. But I had posted a video talking about my 6 month, I think it was my 6 month journey in the very beginning stages of working with him. And you have to have a lot of belief and a lot of confidence, I found, in order to do something like that. Because if you post your experience with a particular spirit or practice or whatever, you may have tons of people in the comments saying, that's not true. That didn't happen for me. That didn't, and so you have to really, at some point, choose to go with your own belief and your own gnosis on what actually happened versus letting other people influence you. And then from the not the creator side, but from the consumer aspect of it, if you're consuming all this content, like on TikTok, for example, where people do these over exaggerated videos of what happened when they were working with a particular spirit they summoned or working with a particular deity, if that didn't happen to you, now you may second guess your experience with that deity. Well, oh my gosh, this grandiose thing with this spirit didn't happen for me, but it happened for this creator. So I think I really like that you brought that up because belief is really hard in an online space. I wonder if you've experienced that too.
Oh, totally. Well, even before I think we were all living on the internet, like the internet was still a thing, right? But before
Mm,
we were really like entrenched in it, I remember going to my first open rituals, like at the metaphysical shop in the next town over when I was a college student and I had my first car, so I was more mobile. And I remember going, it was the first time I'd ever been in ritual spaces with other people, almost all of whom were strangers to me at this point, and how I don't even know what adjective I want to use. Maybe disheartening. Disheartening, but like simultaneously exciting, right? You'd go to an open ritual and you'd be in usually some kind of Wiccan-esque framework where everybody's like standing in a circle and there's an altar in the middle. And imagine holding hands with strangers. Everybody's eyes are closed, and the people on either side of you are breathing really intently, like they are having some kind of experience or they are trying to facilitate, like something bodily is happening in the people around you that you can see and hear, but it's not happening to you.
mm,
You know?
mhm.
And then when like the ritual itself is over, and if you've ever been to these public kind of like outside in a parking lot or a field style open rituals, um, they're important, I think. Like this is how we build community, but they're very, very difficult to pull off. Usually the open public ritual with strangers is not actually the best opportunity to work magic, right? It's much more about community building.
Mhm.
Um, but a 17, 18, 19-year-old experiencing ritual for the first time doesn't know that,
Mm.
right? So they show up, and I'm talking about me here, right? They show up and afterwards when the cookie plate is going around and people are saying things like, and they're crying, right? I saw the goddess. She appeared right in front of me, right? And they're clearly having some kind of experience. This happened all the time.
Yeah.
And you sitting there going, huh, did I do it wrong?
Hmm.
Or like maybe she has some superpower that I don't have access to. So that kind of stuff is happening. And the equivalent today, I think, is getting on TikTok and there's somebody using a filter, right, with like the black demonic eyes or something. And they're like, when Hades talked to me, it was like this, right? And there's
Yeah.
like video effects or whatever. And your typical person who maybe has never even met another witch face to face might look at that, especially a youngster, and go, oh, well, I'm really interested in Hades, and that's not what happens when I do my thing. Like, am I doing it wrong? So you couple that with also this tendency that I think witches collectively have to kind of be grandiose. Well, actually, I'm a descendant of Salem.
Oh,
Right. Well, actually, my grandmother taught me, actually, I have witch blood. Well, I'm an initiate in this. Like, we all like to put ourselves collectively into this box of, yes, witches are special, but I especially am special.
yes.
Right. And if that person is the one who's crying and saying that they saw the god appear before them in ritual, of course the newcomers are going to look and be like, oh God, I'm doing something wrong
Hmm.
without actually having a conversation about what it even means to experience something. What does
Yeah.
it mean to have an experience? And figuring out when somebody says, oh, I heard the goddess, I heard Athena, I saw whatever, like when people talk about their senses in magical spaces, are they being literal? Sometimes. A lot of the times they're not, right? Like
Yeah.
those are the conversations that we don't have.
It's so true. What you're saying resonates so deeply with me because I actually recently attended a ritual, which was fabulous, by the way. It was such a cool ritual, working with the Goetia and everything. Anyways, it was an awesome, awesome ritual. And I would not consider myself a beginner at this point. I know what I'm doing for the most part. Okay. I know how to work my own energy. I know how to sense energy and do what I need to do. And everyone else in this ritual was having such incredible responses. Some people were brought to tears, and just like you were saying. And I'm not that 19-year-old anymore. I'm a more advanced woman in her 30s. And for me, to not feel anything in that ritual when everyone else is having all these amazing experiences, I was pissed at myself. I'm not gonna lie. I was a little upset with myself because I was like, what's going on? Why am I not connecting right now? But I think we also need to acknowledge that it's not like you said, that 19-year-old doesn't know any better, and they're going to think that they don't have the skills, or they're not as special enough or whatever it happens to be. But it's not even just about skill set and being special and all of those things. There's so many other things that can play into it. It could have been my mental space for that day. It could have been the fact that I'm working a lot of angelic magic right now, and that just does not work with the other things that I'm trying to do. And so there's all these different reasons of why I potentially did not feel what I wanted to feel in that ritual, other than my skill set and my ability to receive that.
Oh yeah, I'm going to share a personal story here a second that
Yeah.
just happened to me. It's so funny. So I just told you I've been spending a lot of time reading about spiritualism. I've been hanging out in paranormal communities, and these are not like native spaces to me. This is
Mhm.
not something like I'm not a medium. I'm not somebody who's deeply invested in conversations with the dead. That's never been who I am. For a lot of witches, that's really important. There's lots of great people writing about that stuff. I'm just not one of them. And I was having a conversation with another witch friend of mine, in another tradition, right? Different sorts of training, different background. And I said something kind of flippantly. We were talking about this, like out in the community. We're neighbors, and I said something about how like, yeah, I'm just not a medium. Like I really just like I don't hear spirits the way other people hear spirits. And he looked at me like I was the biggest idiot in the world, and he said, "Well, of course you don't. You're neurodivergent. You spend all of your energy trying to keep people out of your head, like in your real life as a teacher. Of course that applies to the spirit world." And I was like, huh.
Rude, first of all. No.
First of all, rude. Second of all, huh. Right. But like I'd
Yeah.
never thought of it in that framework. I'd always just figured, because in like spiritualism, like 19th century spiritualism, there's this idea that like certain people are just skilled as mediums, right?
Mhm.
People are particularly receptive or they've had particular experiences. And in some paradigms, you can develop those senses, right? Like I think most mediums writing today will tell you that you can develop them.
Mhm.
But I was never really operating in a space where I cared one way or the other. Um, and I just figured, oh, well, I'm just not like touched in that particular way, or I'm not skilled, like some people
Yeah.
are really great natural athletes. I'm not one of those either. So, hey, same category. But my friend just like read me to ruin right there with something that would have been obvious, I think, if I'd like really thought about it. Like, oh no,
Yeah.
wait, as a neurodivergent person, as a classroom teacher, as somebody who's very, very deeply introverted, and very anxious, like socially, of course, of course I don't have the doors open.
Yeah.
I spend all of my waking time trying to close the doors, So, yeah, duh.
Yeah, I think we definitely need to apply neurodivergence into witchcraft and spiritual spaces because every psyche is built different and the messages that you receive are going to be packaged in different little bows, and that's just the way that it is. If it's so crazy to me when people proclaim, "Oh, you must have this vision from this deity in order to confirm that this deity actually wants to work with you." And it's like, "Okay, but that vision can come in many different ways." So, yeah, resonate with what you're saying. So I wanted to talk to you about witchcraft becoming a commodity. And with its rise into the mainstream, we have seen witchcraft grow and explode and also be sold and exploited. And if you go
What?
into
What are you talking
Michael's
about?
craft store, yeah, what? It's a
It's not.
surprise. A surprise to all of us. I mean, I'll go into my craft store. There are tarot cards there. There's even spirit boards now, which is wild to me because so many people feared the Ouija board for so long they wouldn't even touch a spirit board. And now spirit boards are being sold everywhere. So I want to ask your opinion. Do you think this is good for our community overall? What are your thoughts?
That's a really hard one because, like, capitalism bad, right? But recognition also entails a certain level of safety in
Mhm,
some spaces.
mhm.
I'm not saying that, selling it at Michael's is the solution, but
Yeah.
like, and as a practitioner, I like being able to go to the craft store and buy like my vaguely Wiccan like scrapbooking stickers or whatever. That's kind of cool, right? It makes
Yes.
art a lot easier.
Yeah.
There's a part of me that is like, hell yeah, Target is stocking like mushroom shit and it's cute and it fits in with my like
It's so cute.
harvest witchcraft decor. Like there's a part of me that is just like, yeah, this is actually kind of neat. Um, but like capitalism is bad. So
I I do agree that it's a nuanced conversation for sure. I do miss the secrecy a little bit. I miss yeah, it's definitely a lot different than it was even 20 years ago, let alone
yeah,
50 years ago. So yeah, I have uh, a mixed bag of emotions, I guess, when it comes to this topic, because overall, if I weigh the pros and cons, I do actually think it's a good thing. I do think it's a really good thing because we're not going to be hopefully persecuted as much. There's more understanding when it's pushed into the mainstream. More people are forced to actually look at what it is versus what it isn't. And they're going to understand that we're not just trying to curse literally everybody that comes at our way. We're not evil old hags. Well, some of us, sometimes I am, but you get what I'm saying. Like it's, yeah,
aspiring.
yes.
Mhm.
Exactly. So overall, I do think it's a good thing, but it is a nuanced conversation for sure.
Yeah, and I think that there's some areas of like industry where it's more problematic than others, or maybe just
Mm.
more visible than others. So, like, something that I spend a lot of time thinking about that other people probably don't is the surge of AI books that are on the
Oh
market
my
right now.
God. Yes.
And I don't think that most people even realize it's happening. And
Hmm.
I blogged about it a few years ago, and people were real mad about it. But like, but now it's entered kind of a wider sort of conversation. I mean, there's a local bookstore like in my area. That's what local means, Thorn. And they have AI witchcraft books on their shelves. And
Oh
I
my
know
God.
they're not doing it on purpose. Like whatever distributor they're using sends over the case for that section or whatever. And they're sending over books that they think are going to sell. And people are just buying books that literally aren't even written by human beings.
Yeah.
And this is not rare, it's not uncommon. If you go to Amazon and you just type in witchcraft, you have to go through a few pages before you really start seeing a lot of books written by humans.
Hmm.
And that raises a lot of questions about like how we learn and who's worth learning from. And there's nuance around the AI conversation too. But like as a witchcraft writer, as somebody who spent a lot of time cultivating writing as a skill, I wasn't talking to dead people, but I was practicing writing, you
Mhm.
know.
Mhm.
Um, it makes me really sad that your typical reader now, like, they're not even consuming books the way you and I were even 10 years ago,
Yeah.
15 years ago, let alone 20 or 30 years. So that's one area that I think we see. And I think probably another area is people buying like the inexpensively produced kind of like, was slave labor involved in the production of this magical tool from whatever site on the internet, right? Like those are real questions.
Yeah.
And those I think maybe are those are easier conversations to have, I think, than, well, is witchcraft being in the public eye a good thing or a bad thing? Because
Right.
there's a whole lot happening with that.
Right.
So I don't know. It makes me sad. I was actually on Instagram yesterday, and I clicked on the Witches of Instagram hashtag, which I really hadn't done in a while. And I remember only like 5 or 6 years ago, when you did that, you would see actual witches, like accounts, pictures of people doing stuff.
Yeah.
There's a girl with a candle. There's somebody's altar. There's somebody holding their pet cat. Here's somebody showing off like their tarot deck haul. It would be human beings, though. Now, when you click on it, it's just memes and advertisements.
Oh,
It's no actual people.
yeah.
And like that makes me really sad because it feels like, well, there's no community behind that. It's just ads. And a lot of it is bad or wrong or just factually incorrect. Like, that makes me sad. I'm
That is
sad for
really
people
sad.
coming up now who don't get the things we had.
To see authors like this not only do AI, use ChatGPT to write a book, but then plagiarize and use all of this content from other people's books. And it's like, come on, come on. Like yeah, it's very, very frustrating.
I know that there are publishing houses that are doing it too, right? It's not just like some rando in a basement with
Right.
like doing something online with like Amazon PDFs or something. It's people actually producing tangible books like
Yeah.
from publishing houses as well.
Yeah.
And a lot of the kind of the legalities around the use of AI. And I see this as a university teacher, like working in classrooms. Um, Students are allowed to use AI, right? And now the conversation is no longer should students use AI. The conversation is how do we want students to cite ChatGPT? That's the
Oh,
conversation.
that's such a hard conversation because how do you, oh God.
Yeah, and I don't think that people like realize what like what's going on even. Like
Mhm.
the use of AI to generate text is just a reality now, and it's been a
Mhm.
reality for a little while. And when I brought this up initially several years ago in a blog, and I've watched other people write about it too, right? Like you yourself have called it out several times on your channel. The reactions are often mixed. One of the sentiments that's expressed is like, well, knowledge should be freely available. ChatGPT is pulling from these open sources or whatever. So like if the reader is getting the right information, then doesn't matter where it came from. And like that's kind of an existential question. You know what I mean? And I'm not prepared to say one way or the other. Like these are nuanced conversations. Um, as an author, it makes me sad and scared. As a teacher, it makes me really worried. It makes me really worried.
Yeah. Well,
That student can't read or write, you know.
exactly, exactly. And to what you were saying about if somebody's using ChatGPT or any other AI to help them interpret something or to get clarification on something, that's one thing. It's one thing to, I'm not saying that AI is bad by any means, but with spirituality, it's so hard for an AI to be able to properly convey a spiritual practice. And so the information is often not correct when it comes to spirituality. There is a lot of personal gnosis that just can't be explained through a chat GPT or AI system. And so when I'm reading these books that are very clearly, I can tell that they're AI because the way that they're written, and I'm reading through it and it's wrong. Like a lot of the information that they're presenting is not quite accurate anyway. So it's not even just a conversation of, well, if it's credible information, who cares if it came from a robot or a human? It's the fact that this information is just not good. So it really,
Yeah.
there's no value that you can place on human written books because there's that personal gnosis element, particularly when it comes to spiritual community. Other communities can have their own conversations about whether AI is appropriate, but for spirituality in particular, I think it does need to come from the wisdom of a human, not a robot.
Well, and from a reader's perspective too, echoing that, a human author can be called to task, right? If Thorn Mooney writes something terrible or incorrect or whatever, you
Mhm.
can email Thorn Mooney or go talk to
Oh,
Thorn Mooney at a conference and you can have a conversation about it. You
yeah.
can't do that with a bot, you know? So I always encourage readers to think about books as conversations. This
Yes.
is why when I'm feeling provocative and controversial on the internet, one of the things that I'll say is there's no such thing as a solitary witch in the way that we often use that term. Well, I teach myself. No, you don't. You've got a pile of books and you've got a zeitgeist and you've got a community and you can exist in community without physically being in community. This over here is community, right? These are all
Yes.
ideas that are circulating and being discussed, and like, you don't have to have read that book that came out 30 years ago to still be exposed to its ideas in other
Mhm.
forms. Um, and when you consume books, you are engaging with human beings, which means that you can tell them that they're wrong,
Yeah.
right? Or, hey, did you think about this? Or actually, if you apply this idea to this thing over here, right? That's the premise of scholarship, is you're existing in conversation. And I think AI books, they're going to exist. Like whatever, they're going to exist. That's just like a done deal. But a grounded, educated reader can come to train themselves to be aware of where they are in genuine conversation with people versus where they aren't.
Yes.
Um, that's what I tell folks.
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective to have. So let's talk about how witchcraft has really been maybe beneficial to your life or how it has changed your life and why after all these years you are still a practicing witch because you've been a witch for a really, really long time. So how has it changed your life? What has that evolution been?
Oh man, that's a lot. That's a heavy thing. And I
I know.
have I have flippant answers and I have deep personal answers, and I'll give you a little bit of both.
Yes, please.
So let's start with the flippant ones because I think people don't talk about those. Being a witch is really fun. It's really, really fucking fun. And honestly, I think that that's enough. I it gives me, we spend a lot of time on the internet, especially trying to prove to people that like it's very serious, it's not a hobby. But it consumes my life in comparable ways that hobbies do, right? Like I want to go to events and I want to talk to other nerds who care about the same stuff I do. And it pushes all of the same buttons that something like fandom pushes. I think if we're really honest, like it the community is there, the niche kind of hyperfixations are there. The potential best friends are all there, right? Like, and that brings me a lot of joy. It brings me so much joy to see people who I met on YouTube 10 years ago suddenly like writing books, right? Like that's incredible to me. I love that. Getting to meet people for the first time who I read their book when I was 13. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
um, it's exciting and it's fun, and I want to keep doing that. So that's my flippant kind of like, I really don't think it's a shallow answer, but that's a thing. Witchcraft is really fun. Um, and for all of their problems, witchcraft communities are really fun. Um, on a more serious note, witchcraft has given me kind of a cosmological framework that I just didn't have otherwise. I make a I sometimes joke that witchcraft is a way for people who were reared in secular spaces to kind of have religion
Yeah.
in a way that um, builds and fuels something, rather than constricting it. Um, I didn't grow up in a religious household. I really wasn't exposed to religious people until I was an adult. Insofar as you can have something like a secular upbringing, that's what I had. And witchcraft gave me a mythos, right, that I didn't have. It gave me a way of relating to the natural world in a way that, your kind of like materialist capitalistic culture doesn't necessarily have built in anymore. And that helps me to navigate the things that happen to me. And it's not always pretty and it's not always, comforting, but it gives me that language and that context.
Yeah.
Um, and that's really valuable. That's been really valuable for my sense of belonging and community. It's given me an additional layer of purpose. And as a coven leader, the people who come to me, who seek out membership in my group, in my tradition specifically, I see a lot of those same kinds of impulses. A lot of them are people who either have no religious background at all, or they have really kind of like traumatized religious backgrounds that they're trying to remedy and explore in safe ways. So witchcraft provides frameworks for all of those things. And it's also kind of at its most base level, a toolkit so that you're never really powerless
Yeah.
when something happens to you. Yeah, but I want to emphasize the fun because I think a lot of people don't. Witchcraft is hella fun.
It is so true. It is really, really fun. I really like hearing people's answers to that question because some of it is just, I love having a sense of autonomy. I love being able to take life by the horns and make it my own and really create this reality that I desire versus just allowing things to happen to me. And then I'm in a state of reaction, reaction, reaction rather than taking action. So that for me is the biggest point too to my witchcraft practice. It really gives me a sense of independence and being able to take life and do what I will with it. But yeah, I really appreciate your answer because on a deeper level, obviously, there's all this metamorphosis that happens. There's so much transformation and spiritual devotion that can happen in a witchcraft practice, and it's just fun to just like light a candle and grind some herbs and shit. So
Yeah, it's
yeah.
really fun.
It is just a fun time. Do you want to do a little show and tell? I want to end this with a show and tell.
All right.
I did not, the items that I was going to show are not finished and they're actually off screen. So I have to grab them really quick. So hold on one
Yeah,
sec and then we'll do a little show and tell situation. They look like basically nothing right now. Okay, it's the idea. It's the vision.
I'm
Okay. But
ready.
anyways,
I'm ready.
you can go first. You can go.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You ready?
Yep.
Um, so what I thought we were talking about show and tell, and I was like, well, I'm just a Wiccan, right? Like everybody thinks they know everything and they've seen everything. But one of the things that I think is pretty distinct amongst Wiccans that isn't as prominent in a lot of other witchcraft traditions is our use of ritual blades. Now, lots of people have knives, like really practical knives, right? You'll hear kitchen witches talk about the importance of like a good kitchen knife. Absolutely. Here, what I mean are ceremonial blades. So this is one of my coven swords. We actually have two. And in ceremonial traditions, right? And I think of Wicca as a ceremonial magic tradition. Like
I
people
do too.
practice it differently, but the lineage is so distinctly there. It's much more useful for me to think of Wicca as part of the Western mysteries rather than like a British folk practice, right? That makes
100%.
sense to me.
Yeah.
Um, so the sword is a few things, right? It's a symbol of the power of, in my case, me, right? The high priestess of the coven.
Sure.
And it's also a way of commanding the space. So the Afame does something really similar, right? Like people will use it to cast the circle, people will use it to consecrate other tools, people will use it to direct power. And the thing that is unique about me and my blades is that I keep all of mine sharp. To me, the fact that the Athame and the sword are the witch's weapons are very important, and I take that pretty literally. So when I started running a group and I got my first sword, I decided that I wanted to actually learn how to use a sword.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
So I started studying historical fencing.
I
Um,
love this.
and I started learning to fight with a German longsword. So I spent several years with a historical European martial arts group, a HEMA group. I did competitive longsword fencing.
What?
Yeah, I've done competitive cutting competitions. I do have um, several sharps. A couple of them are historical replications, right? I really, really like swords.
Yeah.
And to me, the sword is not like obviously this is not a folk tool, everybody, right? Like swords are expensive. Your typical European peasant isn't running around with a sword, right? Like this is definitely this is an addition, right? This is a thing. This is where you see the ceremonial influence, right?
Yeah.
This very kind of like elite intellectual sort of like power beyond like the magic of the people. But it's like witchcraft is cool. Swords are just really fucking cool. Swords are real cool.
Yes.
And it's wonderful as a magical tool, right? And like I said, people use them for different things. But they're very effective tools. And when you want to talk about um personal power and autonomy, I dare you to feel more empowered than when you're holding a sword.
Hmm.
Right? Like, come on, especially as a woman, like
Yeah.
to me, the sword and the power of like, I don't know. I'm not into gender, right? But like I do understand what it's like to be marginalized for my gender. And swords make a lot of that better.
Yes.
I think every marginalized person needs a sword.
I do too. I do too. Just, oh man, I love knives, daggers, swords. I'm so glad that you
Mhm.
showed that off. I almost brought mine to show my ritual ceremonial dagger, but I already showed it on another video and I knew you were going to do the sword thing too. So, I love that though. I had no idea you were into fencing and stabbing people and stuff. That's great.
Yeah, it's been a couple of years, but the bloodlust still sits within me.
I get the bloodlust, let me tell you. So my new thing is it's not finished, so it's looking a little rough, but I just want to say I'm working with a bunch of different trees to create different types of wands because there's this forest
Oh,
that, okay, so context, there's this forest that I have started to develop a relationship with. It's like 15 minutes from my house and it's miles and miles of mossy trees and pure forest. And when you walk in, there's like no one there ever. And so I'm walking through, which is really hard because I live in a city. It's hard to
yeah.
find places where there's no one. And so I'm walking through this forest, having relationships with these trees and meditating with them. And I've been slowly collecting different, fallen branches from different trees and what have you. So I'm currently working with the trees of my area. So obviously these are just sticks right now and they're just sanded down and I hope to carve them a little bit more. But all of my years of practicing witchcraft and magic and all that, I was never drawn to the wand, like the symbolism of that. It was just never my thing. But then I really got into trees and my partner
Yeah.
is obsessed with trees. They have like full tree tattoos all the way up their arm and they have like 72 bonsai trees and trees are just the thing in our household. That's a really big deal. So working with cedar, pine, Douglas fir, and vine maple. Those are the four that I'm kind of developing relationships with. And it has been so freaking magical. Let me just say. So they look like nothing, right? Like this just a
They
rod.
don't look like nothing.
Thank
They're
you.
beautiful rods of
Thank
power and
you.
potential.
Beautiful rods of power. This is one that I found recently in the rainforest that like I just started with. You can see the crystals that I've imbued on it and a little bit of moss that I've added. This is a little knobby fellow. So he's really I don't know. I feel like this is the perfect handle and I can just, you
I
know,
love
I
it.
don't know. But anyways, so I'm really into my wand game lately when I have never, I mean, I've read books on wands. They just never resonated. I was like, "Ah, I don't really feel like I would ever use one." And then lately I'm like, wand this, wand that. I'm all over it. I don't know. Maybe
Mhm.
it's just that particular element or that vibe that's calling to me lately. So
I love it when stuff like that happens, though, right? Like
yeah.
you've been around for a few years, and it's like all of a sudden you discover something that
Hmm.
other people have been into. Like that's great, and that never stops. And how cool is that?
Yeah, I think the silliness for me when it comes to wands specifically, because growing up, I was such a Harry Potter girl. I mean, let's be real, before all the stuff went down with Harry Potter, but you know what I mean.
Yes.
So, yes. And so with Harry Potter and shows like that, there was always, Wingardium Leviosa and all the spells that you would do. And so I always felt silly in my own magical practice using wands because it always reminded me of these fantasy novels and movies and whatnot. And I've finally gotten to the point where I've deconditioned myself enough to where I don't feel silly using them in ritual. So I think that's really what has kept me away from wands for so long, but they really are freaking cool. So just like your swords.
We both picked stabby
We
things.
did. We did pick stabby things. Surprise, surprise. No, just kidding. I wanted to thank you, Thorn, so much for coming on this channel. I really appreciate you being here. You're someone that I have just looked up to in this community. I already told Thorn this offline, but I've really looked up to you for a while. So I think your voice is just, you're going to be one of those witches that I truly believe goes down in history. You know what I mean? Like, I know that probably makes you feel awkward for me to say that to you, but I truly believe it.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's very kind. I'm excited that people want me around, that I get to be part of this. Like, I think that's really cool. And the potential that our community offers to potentially create that space for any, you know what I mean? Like, I was just a girl who bought a copy of Teen Witch, right, in
Hmm.
2000 or whenever the hell that came out, right? Like,
Yep, same.
um, and I just kept at it. Like, that's really all it is.
Yeah.
And I think that anyone potentially has the space to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's really cool. And it's such a pleasure to be a part of this community.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you. Thank you, Thorn, so much. For anybody interested in connecting with Thorn further, I will have all of her links in the description box as well as her new books. Definitely don't forget to pick up Witches Among Us because it's pretty freaking cool and I love it. Thank you all for watching. I will see you all in another video soon. Bye, everyone.